Welcome to today's webinar with Tribal Leadership Council. We're presenting in partnership with FS Advisors. They're a native-owned business and the largest financial advisory firm serving Indian country. And they're going to be presenting on a very timely topic, tribal reserve dollars. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here for this important discussion. We're very fortunate to be joined today by two incredible presenters who bring both technical expertise and a deep understanding of tribal governance to guide us through this important topic. First, we have Jeffrey Capoeman Jr. He comes to FS Advisory Group after serving in several key financial roles within the Quinault Indian Nation, including budget manager. He brings more than 5 years of hands-on experience in financial forecasting, policy development, indirect cost rate management, and economic development, all grounded in supporting tribal self-determination through sound financial systems. And joining him is Dr. Sabrina Renteria from the Bishop Paiute tribe, who serves as managing director for the Tribal Administrative Services team. Dr. Renteria specializes in helping tribal governments strengthen fiscal stewardship and align financial policies with sovereignty-driven governance. Her work bridges federal compliance and indigenous-led decision-making to create culturally grounded strategic solutions. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of each section of the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Capoeman and Dr. Renteria to get us started.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. And thank you for those introductions. We appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about something that is absolutely essential for tribal financial stability, but is often overlooked until it becomes a crisis. In the tribal government world, we are heavily dependent on federal funding, most of us at least, and many of our programs rely on timely drawdowns to operate. So when those drawdowns stop, whether as what we've seen recently because of the federal government shutdown, and thank goodness we're reopened as of last night, but this can cause delays at the federal or at the agency level or administrative issues here at the tribes. The tribe still has to keep going and people still need services, employees still need to be paid, and operations just can't pause. So today we're going to talk about tribal reserve dollars. Again, thank you for the introduction in the beginning here. But today's agenda, we're going to talk about history of federal government shutdowns. We'll talk about tribal reserve dollars. What are they and why are they important? We will be identifying target reserves with performance indicators. And we'll also talk about how do we actually build those reserves and what not to do. So cautionary tales as we build them. And then how do we maintain and appropriate those funds? So we got a full agenda for you guys today. And I will pass it over to Jeff to talk about the history of government shutdowns.
Yeah, there's never been a more pressing story in our timelines, especially today. In my 5 short years working with the Quinault Indian Nation, there were threats of a government shutdown, and there was actually one government shutdown. So this seems to be a recurring issue and sort of a recurring concern for tribes across the nation as we see more frequent events of these shutdowns. These are just the most recent storylines, and I'm sure everybody's frantic about the news and stories of this government shutdown. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Sabrina? So I just wanted to list here the timeline and the increased frequency of government shutdowns. And not only that, but also highlight that the duration of these shutdowns is typically not of great concern. Until recently, we've seen our longest government shutdown of a little over 40 days. So when planning and building your tribal reserves, or if you're expecting a cash shortfall, this is absolutely the worst case scenario. What we're experiencing today is this 40-day shutdown. But this doesn't go to say that you can expect to not receive cash for a year, even half a year, or years on advance. So even though this is a concern for us, this is an absolutely deal-breaking and should not be deal-breaking for most tribal governments, especially with effective planning. Yeah, the most noticeable impact to tribal governments will be your inability to make drawdowns throughout a government shutdown. So most of you are familiar with the BIA portal for drawing down funds, and there are other state and federal awards that you guys probably operate that require occasional drawdowns of cash to continue operations for that program. That cash inflow will be unavailable typically during a shutdown, and will result in a noticeable decrease in your available cash for operations throughout the year during one of these events. So to respond to this, tribal focus should be available cash on hand. You should plan and prepare to retain additional cash on hand to continue operations as usual, so that you don't have impacts to your tribal community members when there are pauses in cash inflow, because these are not a stop or halt of programs, but it is essentially a hiccup. It is a pause. So how do we prepare for that? Hopefully we can help bridge that gap in understanding today. Next slide. And so tribal reserve dollars, what are they? I can't think of a better example of a rainy day fund. This is, again, absolute worst case scenario. So when we refer to tribal reserve dollars, these are funds that tribes should be setting aside, purpose restricting, or at least committing or assigning these funds through a formal action to prepare for this rainy day. And whether that rainy day is a federal government shutdown, or some other emergency event related to these federal awards and operation of these programs, this additional cash set aside should be reserved for their sole specific purpose of those programs temporarily, and you should plan to replenish those funds at a future date, as these should only be used for a pause in operations. Tribal reserve dollars, they stabilize operations during delays. They protect essential services for our most vital populations. They prevent layoffs and furloughs or severe program cuts. I know in the most severe cases, some entities and agencies or even tribal governments enter into furloughs because of this cash shortfall. They provide additional financial sovereignty if planned and used and appropriated correctly. And they demonstrate strong governance and planning. So if this is planned and utilized effectively, it offers extreme financial flexibility and sort of bolsters your own tribal self-governance. It is a critical part of long-term financial resilience, as you are all well aware that we operate a lot of federal programs, but in order for us to prepare to continue those in a time of crisis, tribal reserves provide tribes an opportunity to bolster their resilience. Identifying target reserves with KPIs. So if a tribe would like to figure out what their reserve should look like, there are a handful of metrics that you can use rather than arbitrarily assigning a dollar value to how much you think you should save, or saving all your money and purpose restricting it, which is not advised. You can use actually a days of cash on hand metric. What days of cash on hand tells you is how much cash you have to continue and sustain operations for how many days. And what that looks like is your total unrestricted plus cash equivalents divided by the total operating expenses times 365 days. Next slide. So to calculate your target reserve balance, you can sort of just flip this formula around and manipulate it slightly to identify what that expected cash value is to sustain operations for a number of identified days. So instead of calculating DCOH, you take the DCOH and multiply it by your total expenses throughout the year. So thinking of this through an example and putting some reality behind some arbitrary or sort of abstract values. Say you want to build a reserve for 90 days of operations in the event of a federal shutdown or any sort of crisis event that would pause drawdowns for 90 days. Using the DCOH method, you can, let's say you have $1.2 million of existing cash. You know that there are identified operating expenses that you would like to cover. That should be roughly $8 million. The DCOH that you currently have covered is 54.75 days. So there is roughly a 35-day shortfall in your target coverage period. Next slide. So you want to get to 90 days. The tribe decides to cover 3 main programs in this example that rely heavily on cash drawdowns, and those programs are the health department, your social services department, and your police department. Next slide. Using prior year actuals rather than budget, I would suggest going and peering into your actual most recently completed fiscal year audit actuals, as that would provide the most accurate information. So let's say for this example, the health department has spent $4.5 million, social services has spent 2.8, and your police department has spent 700,000. This would give us a projection of roughly $8 million. Now, to identify our target reserve and plugging those values into trying to establish what our target reserve value is, we would take our 90 days of target operating and multiply that by that $8 million of expected expense, divide that by the number of days in the year, and you can identify roughly $1.97 million that you need to cover 90 days of operations for these programs. Yeah, this is, again, so you have $1.2 million of cash available currently. Separating that from your target reserve or taking the difference between those two, you need to save an additional $770,000 to reach that 90-day reserve target. Now that is if you choose to commit or assign all of your available cash into a tribal reserve, but this is just an example of that variance of additional cash you need to cover operations.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. So moving forward on and kind of keep up with this example as well. But moving forward to building your tribal reserve. So as we all know, sometimes saving money, especially in tribal government, isn't easy. Really not because we don't want to, but because our programs are constantly stretched and our needs are always higher than maybe the resources that we have. And oftentimes our priorities even shift throughout the year. Sometimes it can feel exactly like the story of Sisyphus. Every year we're pushing that same boulder uphill, trying to save, trying to build stability, and then something happens and that sets us back. But that's why a tribal reserve fund is so important. This fund becomes the tribe's internal line of credit, which again is that financial cushion that keeps operations moving when that federal cash flow stops or gets delayed. So instead of scrambling, and I know we probably all have done that, or making emergency cuts, the tribe can rely on its own reserves to stabilize operations, protect employees, and again, ensuring those services continue without interruption. It's really about financial sovereignty, being truly prepared for those emergency situations, and also giving the tribe some breathing room when those external systems fail. And I think once that mind shift kind of happens from saving is way too hard to saving is how we protect our people, the tribe can start moving from reactive to strategic. So this is really the turning point in that process. Once the tribe really decides they want to start a reserve fund, the next step is just ensuring that we have all of leadership buy-in, because you can't build a reserve without that clear, consistent support from the council and executive leadership. And it's not just a verbal agreement saying, yes, go save, make it happen, really has to be formalized. That means enacting a solid financial management policy, passing that through resolution saying we are committed to this reserve fund, and again, document everything in writing so that it maintains throughout the years. These actions really create the structure, the authority, and honestly, the momentum needed to keep the reserve growing year after year. Without that foundation, the reserve becomes something that is easily forgotten or pushed aside. And I think we've all experienced this even with other situations within a tribal government. When new leadership comes in, priorities, things change. But if we do have this in writing and really, again, hold that commitment across the board, we can really save for that rainy day. So the authorizing documents are really important because it sets the expectations, the structure, and again, the accountability behind the reserve effort. So first, tribe has to set a clearly defined reserve goal, and we'll talk a little bit about what that could potentially look like using our example that Jeff went over earlier. This may be a specific dollar amount, or it may be something like, again, days cash on hand, that DCOH. Either option is fine. What matters is that it's clearly stated. Then we have to decide, is this goal static or dynamic? A static goal might say we want a $2 million reserve. A dynamic goal ties the reserve to the operations. So as the past example, we just want to make sure we have 90 days of cash on hand. These goals, again, can adjust over time, but really to even create this reserve, we have to set a realistic timeline. This is really important because building a reserve is going to take time, and you'll want a timeline that's achievable and really provides stability year after year. You'll also need to reference your financial policy. And if you don't have one, that's okay. Now's an opportunity to add this to your policy. But this really ensures that the reserve is governed by these written requirements, not just by intention. It formalizes how the reserve is maintained, monitored, and if necessary, as it should be, appropriated. Finally, identifying the person or task force responsible for implementation. Someone, at least one person, must own this process, monitoring progress, reporting to leadership, and coordinating the actions needing to truly build this reserve. These documents are going to be essentially your blueprint. They'll make sure everyone is aligned and accountable as the tribe works towards creating that long-term financial stability, especially during a crisis. So once your reserve goal is defined and formalized, the next step is turning that commitment into action. So we're going to be looking again using our previous example of how the tribe actually can begin building, tracking, and adjusting. Some of the things that we can do are temporary budget reductions in selected programs, and we'll look at an example such as that. Negotiating more dollars coming in from tribal enterprises into the government. If we need to pursue additional funding to ease that pressure on the general fund, that is an opportunity. And also reappropriating activities to alleviate some of the general funds as well. So we're going to go back to our real life example, and just to recap, we wanted to build a 90-day target reserve. Our cash on hand, our total amount that we would like to reserve is that 1.9 million. Our current available cash is about 1.2, and then again, that reserve cash is about 770,000. And let's just say, as this example, the tribe wants to adopt a 2-year plan to build that remaining reserve balance. So again, taking this through real life, step 1 is the council approved short-term cost reductions across 3 departments. We want to save $150,000 in the health department. We want to save $100,000 in social services, and we have also figured out how to save $50,000 of dollars that was allocated to the police. So with these short-term cost reductions in our annual budget, we can have an annual savings of $300,000. So that's going to contribute, these savings are going to contribute $300,000 of unrestricted funds per year that are going to go towards that reserve. So this is one opportunity in this example. The next opportunity is we're going to negotiate with our tribal enterprises. For instance, if we have a casino and a fuel station and everyone agrees that they're going to contribute to the government at a higher rate, as an example, prior year, they sent over $400,000. The new contribution, they're going to send over $550,000 a year. And this is going to increase our reserves by $150,000 per year going into the reserve fund. So that's going to give us a little bit more cushion year by year as well. But then we're not going to stop there. We are going to look at reallocating allowable costs to grants. So say the tribe performs a funding source review, identifies activities that can legally and appropriately be moved to grant programs. And at the end of the day, this can free up some of those general fund dollars. So in this example, we're going to do some funding source adjustments. We figured out some of the expenses that, say, the tribe funds through their general fund. But some of those expenses are allowable if we place them in a grant, again, going through that process. And if we do this, this can potentially save about $250,000 in this example. So we have some expenses towards public safety that the grant can cover. Maybe we do a 105L lease adjustment, and that's going to provide some savings of about $80,000. And maybe we have the tribe is paying for town admin costs, but we know that that's a grant allowable expenditure. So we're going to actually adjust our grant and do a budget mod and put those costs inside the grant. So that's going to save us about $50,000. So in total, if we do this type of savings, it'll give us about $250,000. And those savings are going to be redirected into the reserve to help us meet our target. And say maybe we just need a little bit more. So we're going to be looking at new funding opportunities. So say the tribe applies for a small capacity building grant and it's going to go towards record management. As an example, that's going to give us $72,000 in indirect savings that would have otherwise been general fund expenses. And that amount is also going to be added to the reserve. So for this example, our total annual savings toward our reserves through all of these tactics, as you see at the bottom, our total annual contribution will be about $772,000. So our final outcome, within the first year, we've saved that amount, and the tribe can successfully reach its reserve goal of that $1.97 million. So now the tribe, going through this process, has a fully funded 90-day tribal reserve. We have a documented replenishment and reporting process, which we'll talk about here shortly. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a stronger, more resilient, be in a stronger and more resilient financial position. Once we get there, and even the process to getting there and building its reserve, reporting becomes a critical part of keeping the effort on track. Reporting should happen on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, really depending on what works best for your leadership and your financial staff capacity. These reports serve several important purposes. First, they inform elected leadership of the progress that you're making. So whether it was a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, you are providing those timely updates. Council really shouldn't have to guess where the reserve stands or how close the tribe is to meeting its goal. Reporting keeps leadership engaged and aware so that they can make informed financial decisions. Second, reporting provides transparency to the community. Our tribal members deserve to know how the tribe is strengthening its financial stability and how reserve dollars are being protected. And as we all know, and we hear all the time, and what we wish in our own communities is transparency builds trust. That's our goal there. And finally, reporting helps guide adjustments. So maybe the tribe is ahead of schedule, maybe revenue dips, maybe priorities shift. Whatever the case, consistent reporting makes it easier to adjust the plan, the timeline, or the strategies used to build that reserve. So at the end of the day, reporting is what turns a reserve goal into a living, active financial strategy and not just words on paper. And I will pass this off to Jeff.
Thank you, Sabrina. I just want to highlight one thing you said as well that really caught my attention, and it really accurately described what a tribal reserve should be, and that is a line of credit. It is not a sort of slush fund, but it is a fund that is there for the tribe to lend itself or to lend to these federal programs that need cash. So I thought that was a great description of what tribal reserves are. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of a word of caution when building tribal reserves, and utilizing the methods that Sabrina had talked about, specifically with budget reductions for building tribal reserves. And to get into that, I want to sort of take a step back and recap GASB statement number 54. And talk about fund classifications. So when you create your tribal reserve through those formal actions, such as approving a policy or passing a resolution that identifies your tribal reserve, you should formally designate that reserve as one of 4 fund classifications that is either assigned, committed, restricted, or unrestricted. And I really want to focus on the word restricted, which is amounts that can't be spent, or amounts that can be spent only for the specific purpose stipulated by Constitution, external resource providers, or through enabling legislation. And what that says is those dollars, those funds, can only be used for the purpose they're intended for. And comparing the different fund categories, restricted is it's the most restrictive. You cannot use those funds for anything else. Unrestricted is the most favorable when reviewing your net position. There are 2 sort of middle grounds within the assigned and committed categories. Those are typically within your general fund as well, but they are attached to some sort of tribal resolution or sort of designation by elected officials, by maybe your general counsel, to use funds for a committed purpose or a project that you guys want to entertain. It is something that you guys pass, but you have the authority to uncommit or unassign if you would like. Next slide, please. So if you have a multi-year funding agreement, residual balances or the remaining balances not spent at the end of the year increase your tribe's net position. You can maintain a reserve fund within those 2 different categories, BI and IHS multi-year funding compacts. You can absolutely build your reserve with those funds, but it will be maintained for those specific purposes. This methodology alleviates pressure on your need to reduce or increase revenues in your general fund, and it ensures that those federal dollars are leveraged to maintain your sovereignty. Next slide. So if it increases your net position, if you are saving cash and using federal dollars to cover a federal shortfall, what really is the issue? When thinking of these federal dollars and the accounting transaction that follows it, if there's any technical staff in the room, you know that when you receive those funds, the offsetting account is unearned revenue, and then it is transferred into restricted fund balance at the end of the year. What this should tell you is that these funds are really a liability. You can absolutely use these for your tribal reserve for the purpose within BIA and IHS. However, it is maintained as a liability, and it does increase your restricted net position in your government. And what that is, why that is not advantageous for tribal nations is because it does not increase financial flexibility or freedom for you to either uncommit or unassign for a specific purpose. If you build a reserve and you do it with BIA funds, you cannot cover TANF, you cannot cover childcare, you cannot cover other programs or other tribal needs that you operate. It is for the specific purpose of BIA. Not only that, but it will require additional monitoring and cash management policies to maintain a tribal reserve with restricted funds. So let's say you create a tribal reserve, you save money within your general fund and put it in an investment account, and then you also save money within your BIA and IHS funds and put that in the same investment account. All of that cash then becomes restricted because you are commingling funds. So ensuring you have effective cash management policies to segregate those funds separately and monitoring and maintaining that throughout the year, it adds transaction risk, it adds audit risk. So there's just more risk involved when you utilize essentially a liability to increase your tribal reserves.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. All right. So at this point in the process, the tribe has its reserve goal. The approvals are in place and the action plan is moving forward, and we've heard some words of caution. Now the focus shifts to properly maintain the reserve as it grows, because building the reserve is only half the work. Protecting it is just as important. The first key step is to create separate funds, and I know Jeff mentioned that. Create separate funds specifically for the reserve, whether those funds are committed, assigned, restricted. Separating them ensures the tribe can clearly track reserve activity and prevent those dollars from being mixed into the general operating budget. And as a reminder, this is, our own line of credit for these emergency situations. Next, the tribe should establish a dedicated cash or investment account. This physically separates the reserve dollars from all other cash, and it reinforces the message that the reserve is not a pool of money to be casually accessed. It's protected for a specific purpose. And finally, it's important to monitor the reserve balance regularly. The goal isn't only to build the reserve, it's to make sure it continues to align with the tribe's target and doesn't exceed or fall below where it needs to be. This allows leadership to make informed decisions year after year. And these steps, again, really protect the integrity of the reserve, strengthens that transparency, and helps ensure the tribe is ready when, not if, a financial disruption occurs. Maintaining the reserve is really what's going to turn it from a one-time effort into a long-term financial safeguard. So what happens when we really need to use the reserve? During a government shutdown, a drawdown delay, or any other disruption to cash flow. The reserve only protects the tribe if the process to access it is clear, documented, and followed. So if that process isn't written down, there's a risk of confusion, delays, or even misuse when the tribe is already in a stressful situation. The first question is to ask, does our financial policy outline how to draw from the reserve? And if it doesn't, then that needs to be clarified now before another emergency occurs. If there is no detailed process in place, then any withdrawal from the reserve should go through formal action, such as a tribal resolution or a council vote. This is, again, going to ensure that transparency, accountability, and have proper documentation every single time reserve funds are used. The final piece is replenishment. So does your cash management or investment policy explain how the reserve will be restored after it's used? Because a reserve is only effective if it can be rebuilt. Otherwise, the tribe may be protected once, but vulnerable the next time a shutdown or disruption happens. So those clear processes for drawdowns and clear rules for the replenishment is going to turn the reserve into a sustainable long-term safety net, not just a one-time emergency fix. So really to kind of recap everything and how to build and maintain our tribal reserve, you'll have a few steps. One is we have to understand the risk. So federal shutdowns, cash flow disruptions really require tribes to plan ahead. Step 2 is we have to use our DCOH to set our target. So again, determining how many days of operating cash your tribe needs to stay functional. Then we need to establish the reserve, adopt policies, approve resolutions, and again, secure that leadership buy-in. Then we need to build the reserve over time, use action steps such as strategic budget adjustments, enterprise negotiations, reappropriations, looking for additional funding, whatever that looks like for your tribe, that's going to help us build the reserve over time. Then we need to maintain and track it. So creating our separate funds and accounts, monitoring our balances, and ensuring compliance with the policy that your tribe enacts. Then we need to appropriate responsibly. So if cash flow stops, follow those formal processes that you set in place and document any use of reserve funds. Then we got to keep replenishing it. So again, ensuring our policies clearly outline how and when the reserve must be restored. And again, the overall goal is a financially resilient tribe with the stability to continue operations even when the federal government cannot. And we thank you all so much for your time today and for engaging in this important conversation. We're going to be looking at the chat here shortly to see if we have any questions. We have some time to answer them. But really wanted to highlight again that building this tribal reserve fund is not easy work, but it is one of the most powerful steps a tribe can take, again, towards that long-term financial stability. At FSA Advisory Group, this is exactly the kind of work we are passionate about. Our Tribal Administrative Services team supports tribal nations across the country with financial policy development, grant compliance, strategic planning, 105L leases, and more. And our goal is really so that we can create those internal systems so that tribes can thrive. And if you have any questions at all or want support developing your tribe's reserve strategy or need assistance in any of these areas, please don't hesitate to reach out to Jeffrey or myself. We're here to help in any way that we can. And for more information, you can also visit us online. You have the link there. And again, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to support your nation.
And while you're putting your questions in the chat, I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you for all of your insights on this. To me, it was really helpful both in framing the reason that reserves are so important and also giving concrete ways to build and maintain them so that you have them, as you said, when, not if you need it. So I'm sure that the folks attending got a lot out of this as well. And I know some of you are going to be eager to have a copy of this presentation so you can look back at some of these details. And that's something that we will be sending out as well. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. This is your chance to get some insights from some really powerful presenters with a lot of firsthand valuable knowledge. So don't waste that opportunity.
Looks like we were crystal clear. No questions are coming in. I love that.
And I know you mentioned that people can follow up with you as well. So maybe you're thinking about questions, but you're not ready to ask them in the chat. If you do have questions, go ahead and follow up with Dr. Renteria and Mr. Capoeman, and I'm sure that they will get back to you with some answers. Thanks to everybody who attended today. And make sure that you keep following Tribal Leadership Council. We offer free webinars like this about once a month, and there's some good ones coming up, so keep an eye out for them.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.